I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
5, 4, 3, 2, we have ignition. Commit liftoff. We have liftoff.
It is my privilege to place in nomination the one man whom history has so clearly thrust forward.
We'll have a short inauguration address, and we'll take down the fence around the White House and have a picnic on the lawn.
It was an incredible year. In 1968, the actions of men and the events they created cascaded into a sequence of surprise and shock, a torrent of news that perhaps has never been equaled. In 1968, the voices of men throughout the world rose in a chorus of pride and protest. And in 1968, the voices of some men were forever stilled in Czechoslovakia and in Memphis.
At 7 p.m., Dr. Martin Luther King expired in the emergency room as a result of a gunshot wound in the neck.
In Vietnam and in Los Angeles.
Senator Robert Francis Kennedy died at 1:44 a.m. today, June 6, 1968.
In that incredible year, there was the long-expected travel to a distant neighbor.
It looks rather like clouds and clouds of pumice stone. And it certainly would not appear to be a very inviting place to live or work.
It was a year in which a winner became a loser.
Forward pass is out in the lead, but Dancer's Image is moving through. It's Dancer's Image taking over at the 16th pole. Dancer's Image, forward pass, and here comes Fancy's Hat. They're coming to the finish line now. Dancer's Image, the winner by a length and a quarter.
The Derby dancer had been drugged, and it was a year in which a loser became a winner.
Tonight, I again proudly accept that nomination for President of the United States.
A former Navy man was on his way to becoming Commander-in-Chief. The Navy's song sharing the spotlight with the President-to-be. The United States Navy. It was their story that began the incredible year. Remember the Pueblo?
Oh, dear Lord, please remember the Pueblo, with its captain and crew so brave and true. May our nation cry out in prayer and protest. Let not disgrace befall the red, white, and blue.
The seizure of a U.S. naval vessel in international waters is without precedent and is intolerable.
Secretary of State Dean Rusk. The incredible year was barely 3 weeks old.
There can be no satisfactory result short of the prompt, may I say, immediate release of that ship and its officers and crew.
The ship was the Navy's electronic espionage ship, Pueblo. Its officers and crew numbered 83 when the outgunned Pueblo was seized without a fight in waters off North Korea. Much of its secret equipment was seized, too. Had the Pueblo spied in North Korea's territorial waters? From captivity, the crew confessed that it had. The captain, Lloyd Booker, asked that the United States also confess and apologize so that he and his men might be freed.
I do not ask this release from imprisonment particularly for myself. There are many in my crew who are in their very early 20s and have not had an opportunity to taste either the bitters or sweets of this life. We earnestly ask the American people to put themselves in our place and ask what they would want us to do if they were here and we were back home.
Back home, relatives of the crew members were angry.
If my son has to take his chances and his country backs him and he loses his life, it's one thing. For him to lay over there for 10 years, 15 years, and lose it slowly, inch by inch, and be buried anyway, no thank you. He deserves better than that.
11 months was the time it took.
A meeting was held at Panmunjom last night. The crew of the Pueblo is scheduled to be released at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, December 22.
The price of the crew's release, a confession and an apology from the United States. What was salvaged was the right to a verbal repudiation of what the hand was doing.
The document which I am going to sign was prepared by the North Koreans. My signature will not and cannot alter the facts. I will sign the document to free the crew and only to free the crew.
At year end, the real story of the Pueblo affair was just beginning to be told by the crew, by the captain.
I was hit a few times and I was punched around. I was kicked, but I was mostly terrified. It was an experience that I'll have to think about for a long time, and I'll never be able to understand it.
Physical torture, mental torment, confession by coercion were all heavy in the air and could not be forgotten as the crew of the Pueblo finally came home. In January, in Vietnam, it was the time of the Lunar New Year, and both sides agreed there would be a truce. The Communist Tet Offensive hit 30 South Vietnamese cities at once. The city of Hue fell and had to be won back. In 1 week, 416 Americans died. There were 350,000 new refugees before the president in Washington could claim victory.
We have known for several months now that the communists planned a massive winter-spring offensive. Well, the biggest fact is that the stated purposes of the general uprising have failed.
After Tet, more and more Americans began to have doubts about a leadership that said we were winning. There was a new phrase, the credibility gap. And after Tet, the Don Quixote from Minnesota, Democratic Senator Eugene McCarthy, gathered more support for his lonely quest to unseat the President of the United States, a man from his own party. For 1968 was an incredible year of politics.
I'm hopeful that this challenge which I am making, which I hope will be supported by other members of the Senate and other politicians, may alleviate, at least in some degree, this sense of political helplessness, and restore to many people a belief in the processes of American politics and of American government.
For a man named Nixon, this was the year in which to begin once more an uncompleted quest of his own.
I recognize that I must demonstrate to the American people that I can win and that I can do the job. I have decided that I will test my ability to win and my ability to cope with the issues in the fires of the primaries, and not just in the smoke-filled rooms of Miami.
For another Republican hopeful, George Romney of Michigan, the handwriting on the ballot was only too clear.
I have concluded that I can best serve my country and the ideas in which I believe, other than as a candidate.
And so, with some hats in the ring, it appeared that 1968 was running as could be expected. Caught in the flow of events that was 1968 was Abe Fortas of the Supreme Court. Lyndon Johnson wanted him to be Chief Justice, but senators like Strom Thurmond of South Carolina could not consent.
I am strongly opposed to communists working in defense plants. I am strongly opposed to communists teaching in schools and colleges. I am strongly opposed to the Supreme Court, the federal government invading the rights of the states, and Justice Fortas has participated in decisions that do the very things I've just mentioned.
Abe Fortas withdrew. There were marriages, too, in 1968. Item, October 20th, Jacqueline Kennedy, 39, widow of President John Kennedy, today married Aristotle Onassis, 62, millionaire, in the presence of her children on the Greek island of Scorpios. Before the wedding, Mrs. Onassis consulted her longtime friend and priest, Richard Cardinal Cushing of Boston.
Never did I say that Jacqueline Kennedy, either to her or anybody else, could be married in the Catholic Church at the present time. I said she could marry anyone she wished.
There were marriages, and there were miracles. In South Africa, heart transplant pioneer Dr. Christian Barnard performed his second operation and gave dentist Philip Bleiberg a dead man's heart. By intercom from his sterile room, Bleiberg spoke to the world.
Well, when I wake up in the morning, I get washed, and then I get up, I shave myself, and I sit down to breakfast, and I enjoy a hearty breakfast. I've got an enormous appetite. I live like a king.
And in 1968, the Tigers defeated the Cardinals in 7 games. There was a Black Power demonstration at the Summer Olympics. The New York Jets won the American Football League championship. And the Czechoslovakians lost to the Russians in the biggest power play of the incredible year. What happened was that the Czech leadership of Dubček and Svoboda did bring bad news from Moscow. Despite the overwhelming support of their people, perhaps because of it, the meaningful reforms that had been instituted would have to be undone, and the further reforms that had been planned would have to be forgotten. It was not, for the Czechs, a good arrangement, but there was no war. The fervor of the Czech people was no match for the weight of Russian tanks. The incredible year was also played out in the streets of Paris. The adieus were for Charles de Gaulle, for in this year it looked as if the general's days as the leader of France were over. A student militant demonstration had turned into a general strike by 10 million Frenchmen. But it was too early to say goodbye. The general emerged once again on top, and the Republic once again survived.
Coming up on 90 seconds, mark, T-minus 90 seconds and counting. The Apollo 8 crew standing by, spacecraft commander Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, Bill Anders. As we come up on the 60-second mark on a flight to the moon. T-minus 60 seconds and counting. T-minus 60 seconds.
It is done as the pyramids were built, or as Parthenon was built. Something we can do that's magnificent and wonderful. Man is made that way. Whenever there's a challenge of this kind, someone somewhere will pick it up.
T-minus 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9. We have ignition sequence start. The engines are armed. 4, 3.
She's building
2,
up and you can see
1,
the fire.
0.
Coming out.
We have commit.
We have liftoff.
We have liftoff. Liftoff at 7:51 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
She's clearing the tower now on the bright
tower.
Flame. We're getting the shaking. The tremendous blast is hitting us now. She's going straight. She's in the roll program. She's looking good. A bright sapphire flame, 7.5 million pounds. They're on their way.
Apollo 8, Houston. Go ahead, Houston. Apollo 8, you are go for TLI. Over. Roger, understand. We're go for TLI. I certainly wish we could show you the Earth. It's a beautiful, beautiful view with predominantly blue background and just huge covers of white clouds. It's very, very beautiful.
We've got it. Apollo 8
8 now in lunar orbit. There's a cheer in this room. This is Apollo Control Houston, switching now to the voice of Jim Lovell.
First status report as follows. Burn on time. Burn time, 4 minutes, 6.5.
The flight of Apollo 8, a soaring conclusion to the incredible year, so filled with tragedy, a note of triumph and hope in a chronicle so filled with despair. The triumph is simply stated. For the first time, men flew around the moon. To adequately express the hope takes the skill of a poet, the poet Archibald MacLeish.
The medieval notion of the earth put man at the center of everything. The nuclear notion of the earth put him nowhere, beyond the range of reason even, lost in absurdity and war. This latest notion may have other consequences. Formed as it was in the minds of heroic voyagers who were also men, it may remake our image of mankind. No longer that preposterous figure at the center. No longer that degraded and degrading victim off at the margins of reality and blind with blood. Man may at last become himself. To see the earth as it truly is, small and blue and beautiful in that eternal silence where it floats, is to see ourselves as riders on the earth together, brothers on that bright loveliness in the eternal cold. Brothers who know now they are truly brothers.